Now, the organisation Brand Africa has announced MTN as the most admired and most valuable African brand at an official launch at the Nairobi Stock Exchange. We're going to give you more details now from Brand Finance Africa Chairman Thebe Ikalafeng, who joins us on Newsnight via Skype. Thebe Ikalafeng, a very good evening to you. I understand the notion of brand value, but how do you measure brand admiration?
Very good question. Good evening, Jeremy. Jeremy, what we do to try and measure admiration is we go to the consumers themselves. We do a survey. As you know, the Brand Africa 100 is a two-step process. What we do, the first thing that we do is we do a Pan-African survey where we go to consumers and ask them which are their three most important brands which they admire, which they cannot do without, and in what rank order. And that's how we establish it in its first basic level before we index the detail, the data.
It's a survey that is dominated by electronics, followed by beverages and auto manufacturers. What do we read into that?
Well, the one thing that we can read into it is that those are particularly electronics and telecommunications, which are in the top five. Those are typically enabler brands. Those are the brands or the services which enable them to connect, to communicate, to transact, and that's why you're seeing them dominate in that way. Of course, beverages and food have always been among the top brands in any survey, whether it's in South Africa, Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, or anywhere else in the continent.
And Thebe Ikalafeng, should we be concerned about this non-African brands continuing to set the pace? 77 of the top 100 entries are dominated by non-African brands. What does that say about our ability as a continent to build brands? Are we lagging in some respect?
Well, I think we have to take pride in one thing, that for the last 3 years, we've been around 23% of the top 100 most admired brands. And of course, the last 2 years, we've stuck at 1% of the total value, which is about $11 billion. But we shouldn't really be concerned so much, because the difficulty that we have as Africans is we don't have the benefit of history. What these big brands, the non-African brands, have got, they've had time, they've had investment, they've had scale, and they've had reach. As Africans, we are not just going past the one survey that's always been done about us, which is age and which is corruption. And for the first time now, we are focusing on what is good about Africa. We are building made in Africa brands. So to me, this is a good start. It's not something to be worried about. It's something to celebrate, that at least we are competing.
In order, though, to accelerate the process, what do genuine African brands need to do to force their way onto that list?
The most important thing they need to learn what the global brands have done, which is to build brands, you must have very good insights on the markets that you serve. You look at a non-African brand like Samsung, and when I spoke to the global CEO of Samsung, I said, "Why are you so successful around the continent?" And he says, "I've been to 53 of the 54 African countries. I've been to their homes. I've sat with them. I understood their issues. I have designed products which meet and respond to the conditions of the African condition." That's what we need to do, because we understand our country, our cultures, and our places better. We need to focus on those insights. And the second most important thing, we have to have very simple, clear proposition. Because to build a great brand, you must be very focused. And third, we need to invest. And that's what the big brands have done. The brands that we talked earlier were telecommunications and electronics. They require a lot of investment, and auto manufacturers as well, which are in the top five. They require a lot of investment. And for you cannot build that brand overnight. It takes lots of years, just like in pharmaceuticals, for example.
Why does South Africa remain the most dominant of the branding nations on the continent? 11 of the 23 brands belong to this country.
You know, Within the African context, South Africa can almost be viewed in the same context as the non-African brands. They've had a long history of building brands. They have a lot of skills in building brands. And South Africa was in many years isolated from the rest of the continent, and had to become self-reliant and create solutions to meet their particular needs. And of course, with infrastructure advantages in Africa, that's why South Africa is leading in the space. But it's not for long anymore. I mean, if you look at the whole whole African continent. The whole continent is growing at 5 to 5.5%, and South Africa is only growing at 0 to 1%. So that shows that the other countries are catching up. You go to East Africa, you look at what Safaricom has done with M-Pesa. I mean, it operates in one country only, but it's certainly the most dominant, one of the most dominant international African brands that we know with what they've done with M-Pesa. You go around to West Africa, you look at what Dangote is doing, industrializing, and clearly our focus on creating a Pan-African brand. That's not going to last for long for South Africa. It just means South Africans have to roll up their sleeves and get back to work and focus on what it takes to build a great brand, which South Africa understands very well.
Live via Skype for Newsnight, that is Brand Finance Africa Chairman Thebe Ikalafeng.